Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about differentiation in mixed ability classes. So I'd like to welcome you to our training today, and I'm recording this session. Our objectives today is to describe mixed ability classes and to explore differentiation and also to discuss different techniques that we can use in differentiation in mixed ability classes. Now, in previous lessons, we talked about difference, and we can describe difference in terms of learner characteristics, which is basically their ages, their learning levels, their attributes. They could be shy, they could be dominant learners, their motivation, their interests, their gender, for example. We also learned about learning modalities, and we talked about the tactile, kinesthetic, visual learners, and auditory learners. We learned also that Edward Howard Gardner believes that humans have more than one intelligence. So he came out with a theory about multiple intelligences. So people can have different intelligences that are beyond the cognitive, and we talked about some of them: the interpersonal, the intrapersonal intelligence, the logical, mathematical, the verbal, linguistic. We talked about visual, spatial intelligence, and a whole list of others. There are about 8 of them. So that is describing learner differences. We also talked about the need to provide equality of access. So when we put all of this together, we have learners that have different needs, and we have different ability learners within our classrooms, learners who are learning at different paces, who who are essentially at different levels within the class, and so to discuss mixed ability classes, we'll be looking at um, the difference in their levels of understanding, difference in the learning pace. Learners have different motivation levels, different interests, and more importantly, their proficiency levels are different, as we see in our classrooms. So they may all be 5 years old, or they might be 13 or 15 or 16, but in that classroom, they're at different levels. And these levels, stretch through all the subjects. Some of them are doing better in one subject or the other. Some are weaker in one subject or the other. And this difference is actually reflected in the multiple intelligences. Okay, but our focus mainly is their proficiency levels, because as teachers, we want to make them to be more proficient in learning. And so we have to come by strategies, to meet their needs. So, on account of that, we're looking at differentiation. Differentiation has been described in different ways. You could look at it as a philosophy for teaching, because if you understand that learners are different, your teaching philosophy might be that because all learners are different, then we may have to provide strategies to meet their learning needs. Differentiation can also be described as a way of thinking about teaching and learning and assessment, in which case, when we have different needs, different learning needs, what do we do? How do we get learners to learn? How do we get them to access the curriculum equally and, to grow from one level of progression to the other within the curriculum? We could also look at differentiation as a variety of teaching techniques, methods, or approaches that are used for a diverse group in the same classroom. The world we're in now favors inclusion, meaning that most schools do not like to separate children with special needs, and most schools do not like to separate people according to their ability. We still have that separation. In secondary school, we have top sets and we have different types of sets of learners accessing the same subject, and they go to different teachers. Some people still do that. But generally, we want to be inclusive. And the reality of life is that we have differences as we interact with life. So within our classrooms, we have different abilities, different learning styles, different learning needs, and all of that. And the teacher has to find approaches that are differentiated, to meet the learning needs of some children. So we use Differentiation in heterogeneous groupings, that's children who have different needs and different abilities. Okay. Differentiation is not about individual learning. So we're not teaching one child exclusively. It's about tailoring your instruction to meet individual needs. So you're not teaching a child particularly, but you are differentiating the methods, to meet with the needs of the learner. We can also look at differentiation as responsive teaching, which is better. Okay, so basically that is what differentiation is. Okay, so let's look at the approaches we can use, in teaching and learning. There are differences and there are approaches we could actually look at. For example, the approaches we use to resources when we're planning. What resources are we looking at? What teaching procedures, step by step, would we want to take? And what knowledge of our students do we want to put into play, as we do our teaching and learning? So those are things we need to consider. We need to know our students particularly well so that we can know how to differentiate it. Okay. All right. So let's go on. Excuse me. So let's look at our readiness. Um, let's look at our learners. And if we're looking at our learners, we're looking at their learning readiness, their learning needs. We're looking at their interests and their motivation. But we generally have to remember that differentiation does not focus on learning objectives. That's for planning. Essentially, it's not the objectives we're looking at because it's already in your lesson plan. But what we're looking at is how to create strategies that we can use to gain common knowledge across. We can use to get common knowledge across to all students who have different learning needs.